Greetings, my name is Blaze and welcome to my channel. If you've not been here before, I talk about thought, theory, and my interpretation when it comes to things that I'm interested in. In today's video, I want to talk about the Völuspá. This is a poem from the Poetic Edda that I believe dates back to the 10th century. And it's an interesting poem because it has a lot of different factors. Apparently it's from pre-Christianized Iceland. So before they became Christians, they had this poem that kind of walks through a lot of different stuff, including the creation of humankind. It talks about the destruction of the world, so to speak. We sometimes refer to this as Ragnarok. And it's sort of like the twilight of the gods. So it's sort of like the old Aesir dying out in battle, but it doesn't really say what happened to the Vanir. So the Vanir might survive. Some of the Óðinn might survive, and some of the Aesir would survive as well, but some of the main deities that you see in a lot of these poems supposedly die in some way or fashion. The interesting thing to consider with this is I wonder what sort of interpretation the Scandinavian people had in the past as they came into the modern era. What I mean by that is if you look at how a lot of the Christian faiths are practiced throughout the world, you have cultural influences on how they're adapted and practiced. And I had a theory. What if modern Scandinavian Christians are in fact worshiping their old deities still? What if what they call God is what most other people refer to as Óðinn? The reason I say that is because we have a lot of things that are done in Christianity that get massively influenced by ancient paths of their culture that they're adapted to. Take, for example, Japanese. They have the word for God, as I understand it, as kami-sama. So kami are spirits. They're like basically sort of nature spirits. And kami can be humans who have passed away. They can be elemental spirits of nature, the land around it. And sama is an honorific you put on to someone you greatly respect. So basically it's like saying a great spirit in a way. However, it's usually translated, kami-sama is usually translated into the word God. So that's interesting. So again, you have a cultural influence there. If you look at some of the North Scandinavian stuff, Óðinn, Völuspá, apparently because his two brothers, are part of the creation of the world. And if you look at the Völuspá poem, they talk about pieces of this, but you can also see it in other locations as well. But apparently, after Ymir was slain and his body was turned into the earth, Mithengarðr, or Midgard, I know my pronunciation's a little bit off because it's not my first language, English is. But they apparently went to Earth and they found two pieces of driftwood. One was an ash tree and one was an elm tree, Ask and Embla, and they carved them into human figures. So a man and a woman. Askr, which is like the ash tree itself, would be sort of like the equivalent of Adam in Christian mythology. And then Embla, again with an E, would sort of be, in my opinion, the equivalent of Christian mythology's Eve. So Adam and Eve, Ask and Embla. And I guess there's a debate of which one might have come first, if they influence each other or not, but it's interesting that there's such a close connection, and that apparently each one of the gods, Óðinn, Völuspá, each gave a different gift to these inanimate objects, these carvings of wood, and brought them to life, and they became the first humans. So that's interesting to think about. If you also think about two, Ragnarok, in a way, is sort of like a final judgment. Now, I theory that Ragnarok has not happened yet, according to the Scandinavian people, and that's because the world will basically be destroyed in fire. In a way, it's sort of like the final judgment, the second coming. I know in, let's see, what religion is it? Jehovah's Witnesses, I believe, have a piece in their mythology where they talk about the world being destroyed and humans inheriting in the earth. So basically everyone will rise up out of their grave and have the second earth. To me, that sounds very similar to Ragnarok and how, again, everything will be destroyed and fired, but new life will come afterwards. So it's a very similar theory, in my opinion, which is what brings me back to my original point. If these cultural pieces are there, even when you introduce a new religion, people are going to practice the way they think spirituality should be practiced. It's very hard to give up your traditions. There's a lot of things that people still do to this day. You can take stuff like, for example, when the Irish came to America, some of my ancestors, they brought with them Ihahalna, which is the eve of Samhain. Samhain is basically November. And to this day, a lot of the Ihahalna traditions are still practiced and celebrated with Halloween. They might be called something different, but they still do some of those practices. Even if it is a very, very strong Christian undertone, you still have these cultural traditions that you still do. So I feel like a lot of these traditions are still going to be practiced the way that they look at the deities. So to me, it's not a far-fetched interpretation to say Óðinn now became the Scandinavian version of what folks think of as God. I'm not trying to speak for my relatives in Iceland. I'm not trying to speak for people today in Scandinavia as a whole. I'm not trying to say this is how they view it. I'm suggesting it as something to consider, some food for thought. What if they never gave up their old traditions and it's just different ways of interpreting the same thing? There you go. There's your thought exercise for today. Feel free to share your thoughts below, whether you follow any of the Christian traditions or whether you follow some of the revival reconstruction movements, whether you follow any practice at all, or maybe you're just an atheist. If you just want to join the conversation, feel free to leave your comments below. Let's have a civil discussion. It's always interesting to think about things and to consider how interpretation might vary across the world and across the generations. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.